Well, I think most pastors at some point in your ministry have probably asked the same question that we find quoted from the famous Jerry Maguire movie, "Show me the money." There's so many things, so many dreams, so many aspirations of what we would like to see become a reality that are centered around the money problem. We would do this if we only had a little bit more financial assistance or financial backing to be able to pull that ministry or to accelerate that ministry. And so we have these dreams and desires. And so I want to take some time and welcome you to the Generosity 101 class as we talking about specifically what needs to be in place to actually help your church grow in its understanding of generosity and how honestly to be a more generous church. Now, the first thing that we need to kind of make sure that we're clear on is when we're talking about generosity, yes, money is a part of that conversation, but it's only a part. There's so much more to creating a generous church outside of just the financial implications of that. So when we talk about generosity, we are talking about things like not only our talent. So, how do we use the giftings that God has given us? We're talking about our treasure. That's the money side of things. We're talking about our time. How do we dedicate our time from the week to the month to the year to even the day when it comes to being about kingdom activity? And then lastly, our touch. How do we walk beside other people? And are we generous when it comes to even our relational connections and our relational time? So here in our intro, I want to begin by just talking a little bit about some basic things that we'll build upon in the rest of the modules. And so the first thing is getting started. When it comes to starting and beginning this process of generosity, the starting point to having a generous church is learning to live generously. And so I know that you may sit there and go, well, that makes sense. But for some reason, sometimes we miss that. And so what I want us to understand is if we desire to be a generous church, then we've got to be about developing our people to think and to live differently than honestly the rest of the world lives. And that's learning how to be a giver when it comes to our talent, our time, our treasure, and our touch. I want to begin by just kind of walking you through some learning points, some things that I've learned along the way, both from experience of doing certain things that worked and also from mistakes in the way that I've led, but also watching and observing other leaders in other churches from around the country as well. So here's some lessons learned along the way. Number one, approach the church budget as a tool and not as a rule. In other words, see that the budget, the financial makeup of the church is a tool to be able to carry ministry forward. Sometimes we can get so locked down to the letter of the law about, well, we just don't have that margin, that we allow the budget to dictate the policy and dictate everything that we can do or we can't do. You need to make sure that there's opportunity to adjust the budget as necessary. For instance, we even wrote into our bylaws that if we were to adjust the budget by 20% or more, that we just need to bring that for an affirmation to the church members. And that allows us to kind of right the ship. Maybe we're in a season of major growth. And in that season of major growth, our finances have actually increased significantly, matching the growth that's actually taking place in the life of the church. Well, we don't want to stifle the opportunity for us to continue to move forward and press on and carry that momentum that we're feeling into the next season. So there may be moments that you do need to adjust. You need to have a different perspective and utilize the budget accordingly. And so see the budget within the church as a tool, not as a rule. Number two, you want to make sure that you have the right people in the right places. And how this carries into the financial implications, I would clarify it this way. You need to have the money people that can be trusted with leadership in those kind of leadership positions. You want people, in other words, that are living generous, actually living out and helping lead the church. If you have generous leaders, there's a higher likelihood that you'll have a generous church. The church tends to follow the culture of the leaders. and that trickles down. And so if you are desiring to build a culture of generosity in the life of your church, but your key leaders aren't actually living this out, then there's a high likelihood your church will never get there as well. Number 3, stop talking about what we need and actually give more time to the vision. And when I say give more time to the vision, what we're talking about is give people an understanding why we give and what are we actually giving towards. What do we give for? And help them understand it's not just for, the staff to be able to get paid, though that is important. This is actually how the work of the ministry gets carried out. And sometimes people just don't give out of their own ignorance. And so you want to make sure you take time to regularly teach about this. But don't teach about it from the standpoint, we need this. We need to be able to get here. If we're not here, we're not going to be able to do this. Cast vision. Help people understand the why more than what you want to do. People will give towards the why much sooner than they will ever give to the what. So stop talking about what we need. More focus on the vision. Number 4, you want to lead your church to practice what you preach. In other words, if you're talking about, hey, 10%, 10%, 10%, we want to be a tithing group of people. That's the beginning of generosity. Then you want to make sure that you're budgeting your church accordingly to be a tithing church. I think it goes a long ways to tell your people, hey, we budget in such a way that 10% of everything that comes into the doors of our church, we're actually sending out of our doors to further what God is doing locally, regionally, and around the world. And the more specific that you can actually talk about these things, you can stand people up and talk about, we're about church planting, for instance. And so we designate a certain portion of our budget just to helping new churches get started. And then bring in one of those leaders that you're actually financially supporting in some type of form. Give them some stage time. Celebrate this as a church and say, guys, we're so thankful. Thank you for being a generous church. Because of your generosity, we've been able over the last year to actually give X amount of dollars to helping this church actually get their feet under them, build a foundation to reach a community that we can't reach ourselves. This is what it's all about. Thank you for giving. Because of your giving, because of your generosity, lives are being changed. Eternity is being changed. And so you celebrate those moments. And this is what I mean when we talk about you lead your church to practice the things that you preach. And then number 5, and this seems simple, and it is, but at the same time, it's something that is not actually done very often in the local church. Set your yearly budget based on last year's giving, and then do what you dream of doing when there is money left over. In other words, let's say last year you brought in $200,000. As you approach the next fiscal year, just set your next year's budget at $200,000. Don't just estimate the fact of, hey, well, in faith, we believe that we're going to have a 50% increase in attendance. Therefore, it should reflect 50% increase in our giving. And you set the budget there. And then as a result, you find yourself at a consistent and constant shortfall, which means that you may have to cut ministry back. You may have created an expectation that we as a church are going to do this, but now because we're at a budget shortfall, we can't do this. Which if you just say, hey, we're setting our budget based on the previous year, you already have a basic understanding of what you can actually invest that money into when it comes to ministry and what you can't. It's wonderful blessing. Let's say you set your budget at $200,000, but you actually bring in $250,000. Now you have $50,000 of play money that you can actually go out and have a good time. Now you do this year after year after year, you'll actually create a really solid financial foundation to the life of your church. And the first year of adjustment is going to be tough. So even if you're a church that's been around a long time and you've done the faith budgeting for the last 2 decades, and you decide, hey, we're going to make this adjustment, you just need to know that that adjustment is a difficult adjustment to actually make. And yet I would highly encourage you, it's a very important adjustment that you need to make as well. So this is a little bit of where we're going to go. Over the next 5 modules, I'm going to break it down and talk to you about very specific ways that you can begin to approach and to incorporate generosity in your teaching and your living to help grow an overall culture of people living generously in the life of your church.